We're all here, I assume, because we want to change the world. And specifically, I think a lot of us because we want to confront capitalism, a system that exploits and degrades the planet and its resources as surely as it exploits and degrades human labour. And because we want to replace it with a system that elevates solidarity from a principle of resistance into the governing principle of society, and where human and ecological need come before the exigencies of profit. And I imagine a lot of us, particularly those who've been involved in organising it, are here at this trade union hub specifically because we share some ideas about the potential agency and where the power might lie to bring about that kind of change. And that some of us believe that it lies significantly with workers in workplaces, organised at the point of production, taking action against our employers. If we believe that climate change is not accidental and is not even just caused by human activity in a sort of general sense, but caused specifically by the way we organise our society, by capitalism. And I think it follows from that that the most effective place where we confront it, where we can confront it, is in its engine room. And for me, that means workplaces. Now, the last year in this country has seen the biggest upsurge in workers' struggle for a generation. Organised labour has reappeared spectacularly as a visible, assertive force. That's the backdrop to this event, that's the context for these discussions, and I think it's a backdrop that presents immense opportunities and some challenges. The opportunity it presents is to reinvigorate the trade union movement with a new generation of worker activists. And the challenge for us as trade unionists oriented to radical climate politics is in our own workplaces and our unions to persuade those activists, our workmates, people in our communities, that our immediate struggles, often over wages and conditions, can and should be connected to that wider horizon, the horizon of systemic change with democratic working class ecology at its heart. Okay, so that's all relatively easy to say, especially when perhaps substantially preaching to the already converted. What does that mean in practice? Well, in the first place, I think it means pushing every struggle forward, doing whatever we can to help it win, seeking opportunities to spread struggles. It means an effort to radicalise and democratise our unions, and it means taking radical climate politics into our unions, especially if we're involved in trade unions that might lag behind a little bit on the policy questions, such as those that still support airport expansion or fracking. I think it means being bold about what those policies are, pushing for our unions to campaign unapologetically for demands such as full public ownership of energy, transport, and of the banking and finance sector, a key bastion of what we might call fossil capital. It means fighting for our unions to oppose and defy anti-strike laws, including those which inhibit us from striking in solidarity with other workers and in pursuit of political demands. Crucially, it means spreading initiatives like the one that members of my union, RMT, working in the offshore energy industry, have undertaken recently with Platform and others, which we'll be hearing about in more detail from Rosemary a little later, to develop a workers' plan for the conversion and transition of their industry. That's a model I think we need to spread into every industry, and not just those thought of as kind of front line in terms of decarbonisation like energy and aviation, but into all industries, including kind of green collar ones like public transport where I work. The struggles of me and my workmates in the public transport sector aren't immediately about climate change in a kind of direct sense, but they pose questions that have obvious resonances for the climate movement, about how transport is organised and funded, about whether our cities have accessible, affordable public transport, or whether they're organised in a way that pushes people towards car use. And dialogue between the labour and climate movements can help make those issues more central in how public transport workers like me conceive of our struggles. So this hub, these discussions represent an opportunity to talk about that, to develop the strategies that we can take back into our workplaces and the wider climate movement, and I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to be a part of that. I just want to end, if I may, with a kind of personal reflection. I've been involved in climate politics on and off since about 2006, and at that time I think it's fair to say that the argument that workers and the labour movement was a sort of key strategic environmental actor was a bit of a minority concern in climate politics. Trade unions were often seen by many climate activists as a kind of conservative force, rather than sites of struggle where engagement and intervention could sort of push the dial. And on the other side, so to speak, climate activism was often dismissed by a lot of people in the labour movement as an essentially middle-class concern. And I'm not suggesting that those arguments have been definitively won or settled, but I think a lot of progress has been made. That progress has some of its roots in activity such as that of the Workers' Climate Action Network and others around the Vestas wind turbine factory workers' occupation in 2009. It has its roots in work such as that, like Platform and others have done with the RMT, in the work of Safe Landing, focusing on the aviation industry, and in the work that XR trade unionists have done generally to mobilise climate activists to support strikes, and particularly to support strikes in key strategic industries. I'm thinking of the work done to mobilise support for the Fawley oil refinery workers strike just recently, which we might hear a little bit about later. And in work like the We Make Tomorrow conference, which is coming up in May, and in this hub itself. That's obviously not an exhaustive list, but I think it shows the progress that has been made and the work that's being done to ensure that class struggle has an environmental focus, and to ensure that people active in the climate movement have a class analysis. That's the kind of work that we're engaged in today, that this hub is about carrying forward, and I'm looking forward to participating in the discussion. So thank you very much.
Big up for Anna from the RMT Union, who's been leading the